Hi, class. It's Dr. Sharma here to do an example presentation and walk you through this first trial run of you guys explaining something to us in a true presentation style format. So I am going to review the assignment description to kind of make sure that you guys understand those pieces and then also give you the sample presentation. So let me share my screen so you can see what I have here. And you should be able to see the Chapter 3, Biological Foundations research assignment. So this does involve you covering a specific biological system, which you chose during class. And you're going to be researching the system. So I do want you to make sure that you use the textbook first. You want to summarize whatever is in the textbook and include citations on your slides. You'll see those in my slides. You're going to be exploring how the system is related to health and disease, and then linking the other systems to your particular system. So you don't have to talk about all of them, but if there's a relationship between the system that you're covering and other systems, it's good to mention at least one, maybe two of them, and then relate it back to the biopsychosocial model. Remember that includes mental health, behavior, social relationships where you can. And then, of course, including some kind of a video resource. You do want to make sure that your video isn't extraordinarily long. Um, you can include up to a 5-minute video, but be careful when you choose videos. You want them to be very, uh, you know, interesting, or they're really explaining something that you think is important for us to see about how the system works and especially how that system interacts with mental health, physical health, because those are the things that we're most interested in, right? So, all right. So I do want to show you my actual slideshow presentation that I have for you. So let's see how this goes. We're going to give it a shot. Um, I decided to cover the skeletal system. I chose this because this is something that's important to me right now. I am struggling with a blood uh, issue. I think I mentioned that in class. So I'm especially interested in this right now. And hopefully you chose something that you thought was especially interesting. That always makes the research project more fun. So here I just have a picture of the skeletal system so that we all remember what it is that we're talking about, right? So we're not going to go over all of the different components, but do remember that the skeletal system is largely the bones in the body, which they're uh, going to be discussed here in terms of their structure and function, because that is the first thing that we are going to cover as per the assignment description. So generally speaking, the skeletal system includes 206 bones in the adult human body. There actually are more in children's bodies because bones fuse together. Generally speaking, the skeletal system provides structure and support for the body. It also provides protection and it allows for bodily movement. So the way that we are able to actually move our body around wouldn't be possible without our skeletal system. It also plays a really important role in mineral storage. So we'll be talking some about calcium, not so much about phosphorus, but that is another one. The production of blood cells in the blood, in the bone marrow in particular. And then there's also some endocrine regulation, hormone regulation, although we're not going to talk about that as deeply because of the time limits. I don't want to go over too much. And then you'll see there at the bottom that I got that information from the book. All right, in terms of the main components of the skeletal system, we do have the bones themselves. So I mentioned that at the beginning, and the bones are important because of the general structure support and the protection that they provide to our internal organs. They also the skeletal system is connected by joints, right? So we have uh, our major joints, including our shoulders and our elbows and our wrists, and then even within our fingers, we have joints. Also in our hips and knees and in our feet. So all these wonderful places where we have joints, we also have cartilage. Cartilage is incredibly important. It helps cushion the connections between the bones, so those joints are nice and supple, and it supports flexibility, so being able to stretch and move around in different directions. Ligaments are also important in connecting bones to each other and to stabilize the joints. So the ligaments actually are longer, whereas the joints are kind of right at the bone. The ligaments kind of connect a little bit further down. Um, and then we also have the tendons, which attach the muscles to the bones, which is incredibly important for movement because the muscles kind of generate the movement, and the bones are providing the structure for those muscles. There's a quick video that I wanted to show you, so this kind of satisfies the video requirement. So let's take a look at that here.
Number one, the skeletal system. The skeletal system is the body system that provides. They are classified.
All right, and that kind of repeated some of the information that I mentioned before, but I also think it's good to hear that stuff more than once, because there are so many different things that our bones are responsible for. So it's good to revisit those same concepts to remind us, even if it is in close proximity. So moving on, the bones also provide support for mobility. So they're the general framework of the body. And because the muscles are attached to the bones with tendons, whenever the brain sends signals from the motor cortex down through the spinal cord and then out to all of the muscles via the somatic nervous system, the body is able to move. And if we didn't have the structure of these bones, then we wouldn't really be able to do some very basic functions that are involved in mobility, like walking and running and jumping and dancing and carrying things. All of these basic functions that we do with our body are so very important, and the bones provide the structure behind the muscles to allow for those movements. So, in terms of relationship to other biological systems, which is another category that we want to satisfy for the presentation, the skeletal system, in particular the skull and the spinal column and the rib cage, provide very important protection for the nervous system. So that's actually one of the ways that we know that the central nervous system is the central nervous system, because it's completely encapsulated in bone. So the skull and the spinal column cover the central nervous system, as opposed to the peripheral nervous system, which extends out into the rest of the body from the central nervous system. And then also the rib cage, it protects all of your vital organs. So all of the viscera that are inside of your torso are protected by that rib cage. So your heart and your lungs and I believe your liver and your stomach are also up in here at the very top. I think the kidneys are lower down. As are the rest of your GI tract, right? Your stomach, I believe, is kind of, I guess it's kind of closer. It's up here at the top. But the rest of your GI tract, of course, extends further down. And we'll revisit that. I'm pretty sure that that's the case. All right, so it does interact with those other systems in terms of protection. It's also important in terms of its relationship to the immune system. So your bone marrow produces red blood cells, and those are particularly important for oxygen transport. So hemoglobin in particular is useful for the transport of oxygen. We also have the production of white blood cells, which is directly related to your immune system function. And then blood platelets, if you may recall, blood platelets are what your body uses whenever you have some kind of an injury and your blood needs to clot in order to keep the blood from flowing. So that's like after you um, develop a scab, those scabs are basically a bunch of those platelets that are gathering there and then drying off. Um, so a healthy skeletal system is very important both for your immune system functioning and also for blood circulation, because your blood is made up of all these components, right? So over here on the right, you can see this image shows you the inner parts of the bone, including the marrow, and it shows that the marrow is actually supplied with blood vessels itself. And remember, that's where in the bone marrow is where um, these particular blood uh, cells are created. So we have the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets. Its role in health and disease. So we have the storage of important minerals, including calcium and phosphorus. And so what the bones do is they actually release the phosphorus and the calcium into the bloodstream based on homeostasis. So if you're low, then it would release more. And then, of course, if you had plenty, then it would not be releasing them at that time. One of the things that's really important, especially for women, is osteoporosis, also known as bone density loss, or whenever the bone matrix itself becomes porous. It's kind of almost like limestone. It starts to develop holes inside of it. And this can result from low calcium levels. And this is something that, in particular, women start to develop as they get older. Um, there's also hormonal changes or just poor nutrition. So people aren't being properly nourished from their diets, which actually kind of ties into the biopsychosocial model as well. In terms of bone repair and regeneration, we have the bones are actually responsible for doing two different things, which I think are quite interesting. So they both break down and they rebuild. So the osteoclasts are the breaking down and releasing of bone, and then the osteoblast is the rebuilding of bone. Um, so uh, fractures. This occurs naturally all the time, but then we also have fractures that heal this process, but there's other stuff that can get in the way. So again, poor nutrition, which is why nutrition is so important. Aging, which is something we try to manage as best as we can as we get older to make sure we have good nutrition and good habits. And then, of course, potential diseases that could get in the way. All right, in terms of its relationship to the biopsychosocial model, one thing that is actually really neat is this it's a hormone called osteocalcin. So, osteocalcin is released from the bones into the bloodstream, and it actually is released during exercise in particular. So, whenever the bone is under stress, and what's cool is that it travels all the way through the blood brain barrier via blood circulation. So it gets into the brain, and it actually causes the hippocampus to grow more neurons, which are the blood cells, or sorry, the brain cells, and then the connections, which are the synapses. And there's even some data that suggests that perhaps, and this is also, it's just preliminary information, but that there are specific neurons in a certain part of the hippocampus, which you may remember is responsible for the formation of long-term memories. That's a part of the brain in the temporal lobes. Um, that you know that osteocalcin may actually be encouraging or causing this particular part called the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus to generate more neurons, which could really help build the capacity of memory. So we do know already from previous research that exercise does increase hippocampal volume, so making the hippocampus bigger. Exercise makes that happen. But this is actually showing that potentially this is the mechanism, that it's from the bones themselves, which I think is quite interesting. So, and it's from the bones themselves, specifically during exercise. So, osteocalcin may be the mechanism through which exercise is helping build the hippocampus. All right. We also have vitamin deficiencies. The first one we're going to talk about is vitamin D. So low vitamin D levels, which is really important for calcium absorption, is associated with bone loss, which we saw with osteoporosis, and mental health disorders, specifically things like depression. Um, so vitamin D actually directly absorbs or it causes absorption of calcium within the intestines or in the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract. What's actually interesting also, I just thought it was worth mentioning, that vitamin K2 is actually necessary to get calcium to the bones. So the D3 helps calcium absorb from your gastrointestinal tract, and then the K2 helps calcium get into the bones. So D3 and K2 are necessary for both steps from the intestines and then from the blood to the bones. And then we can see some places where we can get these nutrients. So vitamin D3 rich food. We have fatty fish, cod liver oil, which is another fatty fish, but it's the oil from it. Um, Eggs, and beef liver and pork. So those are all kind of animal-based products, as well as cheese and yogurt. That's dairy. But we do have at least a couple of things, or three things on the menu. We have mushrooms and tofu, which is soy, and fortified foods that include D in it. I believe a lot of milk these days includes D3 in it, which is very helpful because that helps you get it from the GI tract into the bloodstream. And the interesting thing also about K2 is that it's actually often found in animal-based products. This is important for people like me who went vegan for a while. So places like beef liver and cheese. There's also fermented foods, natto, which is a Japanese and I forget what the exact, I think it's a legume of some kind. But anyway, it's all these fermented foods. So sauerkraut, that's German, and kefir. This is like a yogurt, but these also have K2 in them. And those are, of course, not animal based, or at least not the natto and the sauerkraut. The kefir, I guess, is technically still animal based. It's just not actual flesh. Um, Next up, we have calcium and magnesium deficiency. So deficiencies in calcium and magnesium can contribute to things like irritability, anxiety, and cognitive difficulties. So directly related to mental health. And some places that you can get magnesium are from nuts and seeds, legumes, which are like beans or bean-like uh, foods like lentils and there's a whole kinds of beans, right? Not just pinto beans. We also have like lima beans and white beans and black beans. There's all different kinds of beans. Um, Fiber-rich whole grains, so things like quinoa or oatmeal, low-fat dairy products. So you can do dairy, but try not to do too high fat. So like maybe not so much the butter, but maybe more of like the yogurts and things like that. Um, Greens, fruits, vegetables, and dark chocolate. And then, of course, with calcium, I think a lot of times people, when they think of calcium, they automatically think of milk, which is in a way that you can get it both from cow milk and also from plant-based milks, in particular soy. But look at all of the greens on the menu. So bok choy, kale, collard, edamame, broccoli, tofu, almonds, rice, sesame seeds. These are all calcium-rich foods as well. Physical activity itself is really important for bone health and for mental well-being. So weight-bearing exercises in particular have been demonstrated to be quite helpful. So things like walking, running, resistance training, these all help strengthen bones. Remember that stress that's so important. Actually putting your bones under stress helps them rebuild. And of course, we know that exercise promotes neurogenesis or the growth of new brain cells, which can reduce stress and depression. Also, just quickly, since we're on the topic, it also is anti-inflammatory. So whenever we exercise, there are inflammatory cytokines or these chemicals that are in the blood that get reabsorbed back into the muscle. So also very helpful in that way. And then in terms of aging, as people age, bone density, of course, declines, and this is very challenging for folks, especially if they fall. Then they're more likely to have fractures, and then as a consequence, they can have disability. If they have a disability, then that could make them not as mobile, meaning they can't move around as easily, and that tends to lead to a host of problems, including them having some social issues. So they might not socialize as much or go out and about to visit other people, which can lead to loneliness and depression. So, strengthening bones through exercising, through nutrition, and of course, alongside of that, it helps the person maintain their own independence and feel like a sense of, you know, uh, resilience and like they can do things on their own is quite important. So these are my references. I used a website from the American Cancer Society on the skeletal system, the Cleveland Clinic. I found an actual peer-reviewed journal article having to do with vitamin D3 and vitamin K2. And then, of course, I used the health psychology chapter. So that is the main ideas that I wanted you to cover inside of the presentation. Hopefully that was beneficial to you. If you have questions about anything, feel free to let me know. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you all come up with.